Bienvenidos a todos, aquí del Juan de Lugo, por esta nueva sección de entrevistas de Italian Job. Hoy tenemos el placer de tener a un gran estudioso, un gran profesor que se especializa en cultura, en conservadurismo, en religión y tenemos esta gran oportunidad para hacerle preguntas sobre cultura, sobre estética y sobre política y economía. Y por obvias razones ahora empezaremos a hablar en inglés y, y así vamos. Professor Horvat, thank you very much for being here. I wanted to introduce you to our listeners.
Yes.
Professor Horvat is a scholar, a researcher. He writes many essays, which I really enjoy, especially at the imaginative conservative, and he's the author of a very important book, I would say, especially for us libertarian conservatives, on
Mhm.
return to order. And you're also the vice president of the American Society for the Defense of Tradition, Family, and Property. So, Professor
Right.
Horvat, thank you very much for being with us.
It's pleasure to be with you and to speak to someone on the other side of the ocean. There, it's always a pleasure to connect.
Great, thank you very much. So I have some interesting some topics I wanted to cover because by reading your essays and your book,
Hmm.
it's clear that what touches you the most is culture matters and especially the relations to politics, to economics, and these are mostly the questions I have, and I think they're very important, especially nowadays with all the pandemic and people's maybe
Right.
on these issues. But first of all, I wanted to ask you your sort of general background. How did you come to embrace these ideas? What's the association you're the institute you're vice president of the American Society for the Defense of Tradition, Tradition, Family, and Property, and more or less a general
Hmm.
background on these issues.
Yes, I was born a Catholic, and I was born and raised in the state of Kansas, which is in the middle of the country. I went to the University of Kansas way back in the 70s, so it's been quite some time. And I studied Latin and classics and the great books. That was one of the things I studied when I was at the University of Kansas. From the University of Kansas, I went to become a member of the American Society for the Defense of Tradition, Family, Property, and I've been with the organization for 43 years. The American TFP, Tradition, Family, Property, is a organization that was originally founded in Brazil in 1960, and it spread throughout the world and especially Latin America. And so I'm very familiar with I have a lot of Spanish and Portuguese friends to which I can communicate, but not sufficiently to answer questions like this. But yeah, I've been with the organization since that time. The TFP is an organization that defends tradition, family, and property through books and publications, through public campaigns, through university seminars, through all sorts of programs in defense of family, the marriage, pro-life, anti-communism. We have a very broad range of subjects which we deal with, and always based on the teachings of the traditional teachings of the Catholic Church. So that's basically where we're standing.
Interesting. So you've been there since a long time, and so you can.
Oh yes, I've been with the organization 43 years of different occupations. I've traveled with the organization in Europe, in South Africa, in Latin America. I've done a lot of studies and written a lot of articles and the book Return to Order. So, but right now that's pretty much my function. I am a resident scholar here at our headquarters in Pennsylvania in the United States.
So now you're focused. You're based there. Now you don't travel anymore that much as well. Of course, due to the virus.
Well, right. Yeah. We do. We do travel. the members of the TFP, the full-time. I'm a full-time member, full-time volunteer, and I'm not married, and so I have, and most of the full-time members are not, and so we have a lot of flexibility to do what we need to do and go where we need to go. So if I needed to pick up and leave and go to Europe or to some other place, it's not that much of an issue.
Well, that's great. And you're interested in economics. Did it come on the way on the way of studying, you know, the Catholic contributions to economic thought and the like?
Yes, definitely it did. I am the founder of the TFP in Brazil. The first TFP was a man by the name of Professor Plínio Corrêa de Oliveira. He was a very outspoken, very scholarly, I think, very holy man. And he's the one that got me interested in economics and the studying of the American situation. And I would frequently go to Brazil, and then I would, when I went there, we would have a meeting of a commission, and the commission, we would study economics. He said, you need to study that because this is going to be the major issue in the future for the country, because the modern economic system is not sustainable. And I believe that now more than ever. And so based on those meetings, perhaps 100 of these meetings with him, I developed the ideas of return to order. Return to order has a lot of what we talked about, and it initiated the research. This was started in 1986 and ended in 1992 in 1992. And so I started really studying economics later on in 2007, and finished the book in about 5 years, and that's where we stand now.
Wow, that's great. No, I was very happy to read also your in-depth knowledge about the late scholastics of Salamanca, and
oh yes. I was very surprised to get your request, because, well, not too surprised, because all economists trace themselves back to Salamanca. I mean, the libertarians do, the liberals do. Almost all you read the history of economics, they all go back to Salamanca, but they take different things out of it, or what they want to take out of it. But I think the church did have a very global vision of economics and systematized it. It was the first time economics had really been systematized. And so what they did was amazing, absolutely amazing.
And it's interesting that, unfortunately, even though it's clear that it has, you know, the church has been extremely important in systematizing economic thought, economic theory, starting
Right.
from a moral perspective on, you
Mm-hmm.
know, just price, what's the interest rate, how are prices determined, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And they started, you know, or also the legitimacy of profits and so forth, how they then, you know, understood how, in order to answer these questions, they had to have a grasp of economic reality, which
Right.
was
Yeah. And it's very interesting, because I mean, Adam Smith is nothing in comparison to these scholars of Salamanca. Adam Smith was a moral philosopher, but he doesn't have the depth. He doesn't have that touch with reality that I think the scholastics had. And I only had wished that they had been able to continue, you know, to the future. It would have been amazing what they would have come up with, I think.
well, I don't know if you know, but one of our sort of leaders, so to speak, in the Austrian movement, Jesus Huerta de Soto, always likes to say that actually, instead of naming it the Austrian school, we should really call it the Spanish school, and made there.
That's true. The Austrians, they do go back to Salamanca, just like all the others. Yeah. So there is a continuity. I think there is a continuity, but you know, I would like to see a lot of the moral teachings and the considerations of the more religious and moral considerations, perhaps probably would have helped it along. The Austrians do tend to get bogged down in some of the secular ideas, especially von Mises and Hayek. I mean, they are definitely have a lot of good stuff, but if they had been Catholic, and if they had, you know, that rich background, that rich treasure of the teachings of the church, they certainly would have been a lot better.
Interesting. I Yeah, in Murray Rothbard's economic history of economic thought, it's strange because he's an atheist, but at the
Yes.
same time, towards the end of his life, especially, he starts appreciating, the importance of Catholicism, especially in
Mm.
developing economic thought, and he makes a devastating critique of Adam Smith, saying that he completely diverted us from, the traditional.
Interesting.
And I don't know if you would agree. I mean, for example, he talks about the labor theory of value and these things, which according to Rothbard, inspired on the works of Emil Kauder, were derived by Adam Smith's Protestantism and the idea
Right.
the idea of sort of the work as
Predestination and ethic. Yeah.
destination work, exactly. Whereas according to Rothbard, the Catholic tradition is sort of, yes, work is very important, but it's always teleological towards an end. So there's
Yes.
nothing
Yes. Yes.
bad with regards to consuming. I don't know if you
Right.
would agree that Adam Smith sort of diverted us or the
Oh,
complete
definitely.
Catholic scholar.
Definitely. Yes. You definitely do get that. And they a lot of those Enlightenment thinkers were very well, they were very deterministic. They were very fatalistic. They didn't really understand the relationship between the intellect and the will, and they simply didn't have the moral restraints that the church necessarily teaches. What you say about Rothbard really sort of. I've heard something that he did soften to the Catholic Church at the end, and it doesn't surprise me because once you start searching and going back and seeing where we went wrong and how things go, you will eventually find yourself at the churches in the church. And so maybe if he had lived a little longer, we might have seen him there. But he didn't quite make it. But he did start that journey.
There's just to mention for our listeners, there's an interesting thing I learned recently, and I say it just because I think it's very interesting, especially if you're a like somebody is a libertarian or a free market thinker and likes Rothbard. So it's something that Robert Sirico says, and when they met towards Rothbard's end of his life,
Mm-hmm.
Rothbard said, regarding Catholicism, or Christianity, I'm not really sure about, where to stand, but I'm sure that Mary is the mother of God. So
Well,
he was.
that's a very good start. You can't get better than that. So
It's
that's
a
very,
good.
very interesting.
It's a good start. I looking into your work, you really stress the importance of order. Matter of fact, I really like the quotation you bring up frequently in your speeches, also in your work. Russell Kirk's
Yes,
quotation. I think it's in the Roots of the American Order, where he says, "Order is the first need
needs of the soul.
soul." And it seems that nowadays we've lost this. I think that it's something that goes back at least to the ancient Greeks, to Plato, and also that other
Mm-hmm.
writers had even C.S. Lewis, by reading his The Abolition of Man. He really talks about
Mm-hmm.
this importance of order in the soul and order in the community. Do you think that's a key issue, that we've lost this understanding of the importance of order within us, and also order that then gets reflected in our social, political, economic environment?
Yes, definitely, because order is by definition the state of things whereby things work according to their natural functions and their natural ends. So it does have a teleological function. Order is not just a static state of things. It helps that anything go toward its final end, toward where it is directed, toward what it was created for. And so that is, I think, a lot of the Enlightenment thinkers, especially, were very much took away the idea of a final end, of an eternal end, and turned it into a material end. And that material end is necessarily deficient because we have a soul that desires the infinite, and then we are given the finite as a constant, as something that should satisfy that, but it will never satisfy that. So order, the proper order of things, where man, or as a being, should go toward where he's supposed to go. And I think we've lost that, and it's been a process. It's been a long process over the centuries, but we certainly now we are losing it more than ever, because even very, very basic um, very basic aspects of order are lost. The order of being, of identity, of oneness, of logic. These are very internal structures that we used to be in order, but now they are not in order anymore. And so it will necessarily have economic and political consequences, and we're seeing that today, and moral consequences as well.
And what do you think are the, if you were, I know it's a very abstract question, but what do you think have been the um, the roots of this modern, so to speak, alienation, or modern modern chaos, right? Or distrust of order, or rejection of natural law. I mean, do you see, for example, like the postmodernism, for example, is one of the essential things that have, like, if you were to or I don't know, maybe the cultural sexual revolution of the 1960s. How do you, if you were to like get into the roots of this, modern
Right.
where
Well, it would probably go back to the origins of modernity. The founder of the TFP, Professor Plínio Coelho de Oliveira, he wrote a book called Revolution and Counter-Revolution, and he describes historic processes. And these historic processes are pretty. This is where I would find the roots. He says that we can trace it to the Protestant Revolution that destroyed religious certainty, the French Revolution that destroyed social certainties, and the Communist Revolution that destroyed economic certainties. It was a process over time, over the last hundreds of years. And the sexual revolution also is a very, very important part of that. It would be a fourth revolution, a revolution that was much more internal. It was not a historic development, but a destruction of internal structures inside man that have had enormous consequences all over, in every field. You see it everywhere. So I would put it in that context of a single revolution with 4 or 5 different steps, that downward, that is bringing our society to decadence.
And so yeah, you would bring it back to Protestant Reformation, I guess, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Because that destroyed a lot of the you've destroyed the unity of Christendom, for one thing, and it destroyed a lot of the philosophical foundations of how things of our conception of life. Luther really just his whole concept of man. The church teaches that grace builds upon nature. He teaches that grace annihilates nature, and so our efforts are necessarily different. In the church, you have to fight your vices, you have to overcome them. And as a result, society advances. But in the Protestant Reformation, it's our relationship with Christ that annihilates our will and allows us to do whatever we want. And it's a whole different way of looking at life. And from that, it feeds upon itself and leads to the other revolutions.
I guess also it has. Do you see also an element of the growth of state-centered churches, or at least the
yes
of the state as an entity above the church, right?
Right. Yeah, that definitely does have its role. And it destroys that organic society that allows the full development of the person and the exploration of the potentialities that people have. And so the state, being that overwhelming, overpowering institution that grows and grows and grows and grows. Yes, it definitely is and has no moral responsibility and is morally neutral. It destroyed Christendom, and it destroys the church's vision of society. So yeah, it definitely is.
Interesting. With regards to the sexual revolution, you have a very interesting article on how I think it's in the Imaginative Conservative, maybe.
Yes.
On how one of the products of the sexual revolution is a sort of self-marriage, where you're completely alone. What what do you mean by that, or at least what do you think has been the main impact nowadays of I it seems to me personally that even though sometimes we think about these issues as purely internal issues, right, about
Hmm.
intimate issues, right, or like who cares about
Hmm.
kind of the idea about sexuality I have, right? I mean, we think they do not have to use an economics term, an externality, right, an external
Right. Yeah. Hmm.
effect, but it's actually a wrong view, this one, right? Or do you agree on this, that it has an impact, and it had an impact, and it continues to have an impact?
Right. If you look at the history of all revolutions, they have a political doctrine that they follow. They also have activism, which carries out that doctrine and puts it into effect. But they always have preparatory phases and uh, phases afterwards that put those doctrines into the daily lives of people. And those daily lives of people is manifested in fashions, in art, in literature, and all the tendential or cultural aspects of life. So a cultural revolution is always present in any type of major revolution in society, whether it be the French, the communists. They always have a cultural revolution, and so definitely the things we see today that are very cultural, that may seem very innocuous, and well, who cares one way or the other, they have their effect on the soul. They have doctrines behind you, the music you have. They all represent and symbolize things that affect our behavior and our moral acts that we're responsible for. So yeah, I think it's a big field, and it's very important. And I many times you'll find people in the arts. I think it was the singer Barbara Streisand said, why don't you run for Senate? And she said, I do much more for my cause doing what I do as an actress and a singer than I do if I were to become politically involved. That is to say, she understood the role she played, or role people like her play in pushing a liberal agenda.
Interesting. I
Hmm.
And then regarding to the self marriage in particular, do you think it's a very um something we should worry about, or
Well,
that?
I mean, it is a very freakish thing. I mean, it's not a huge movement inside society, but it is a symptom of something very wrong in our society, where a person says, "I don't want to marry another person. I just want to marry myself," and it's a type of self-adoration, self-gratification. It's a very sort of a logical consequence of a society that makes gratification and makes a person their own god, and independent of other people. So it's just a symptom of the crisis. It's not the crisis itself. But it is a very telling, a dramatic, a manifestation of it. But it's certainly not too common. It's not a major thing today.
Yeah, I see another article. I was really like I feel it's great. Matter of fact, um, it's what made me think about this issue is your article on the late Pierre Cardin as soon as he died,
Yes.
beginning of end of December, beginning of January.
Mm-hmm.
Where you interestingly define him uh, as a fashion designer who destroyed fashion, right? So
Right.
I
Yes.
guess he would be not so happy about that, but but you seem really to stress, right, that
Mm-hmm.
that promoting chaotic values or take
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
fashion, in art, and in these things, um, ultimately pushes us forward toward this social disintegration, this polarization, this alienation, as you call it in other essays.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you say also he's a product of postmodernism, and that there's a
Oh
sort of
yes, definitely. Yeah.
back between the social, the political, and the aesthetic world? Do you think that's true? And do you think that ultimately, even with regards to order, it's very important that there is also beauty, right? That beauty and
Mm.
order sort of get connected. I don't know if you want to develop.
Yes. Oh, yes. No. Yeah. Pierre Cardin was a fashion designer that broke all the rules and loved to break the rules and break rules not only of the marketing of fashions, which he also did, but also the aesthetics of fashion. He just put strange things and make strange patterns and just all types of it was just a crazy and chaotic manifestation of fashion. He put his name on everything, cars and pens and whatever he put it on. And his house was a bubble house, just a house of bubbles, that bubble design. It was just a crazy house, and it reflected a chaotic soul, a soul that doesn't like rules, that doesn't like restraint, and it is frenzied. It's a very much, I use the term in Return to Order of frenetic intemperance, that our modern souls are very not only intemperate, but frenetically so. It just wants to take things to a radical consequence that, normally didn't have. We've always had greed in the past, but we've never had the type of greed and the type of passion that we have today that wants to go beyond just the normal. So that a person, just says, I don't feel like being a man today. I want to be a woman tomorrow. That's something that never was done before, because it reaches a frenetic state inside the soul, and it pushes the person beyond any limits. And Pierre Cardin had something of this. He was a man that just wanted to break standards. He just everything about him, even the fact that he bought the castle, the former Marquis de Sade, who was such a monstrous person, that his works even today are not published because they're just so obscene. It displays this desire to just destroy things, and obviously this does have consequences. And he definitely opened the way for others to come and to introduce fashions. Fashions should have some link with the population. They should have something. They should be a manifestation of the soul of the people who wear them. Modern fashions are simply imposed upon people by fashion designers that really, have no links with the locality or the people upon which they put their things. They just, whatever comes out of their minds, and the ideas and doctrines that they hold are reflected in what they design.
It seems that, as Roger Scruton always used to emphasize, nowadays we have the idea that art is completely separate from the idea
disconnected.
Disconnected from beauty, from showing or representing the sacred in the material world, and explaining how everything has sort of a sacred pattern, right, and a sacred relationship to God. And do you think it's true, and do you think it's one of the reasons why I have this idea of that fashion or values are imposed without any limits, without any idea of beauty, that art needs to surprise or needs to shock, right? This idea linked to the fact that we've lost that sort of divine idea.
Yes. Oh, yes. I mean, beauty is very, very important. It is one of the transcendentals that links us to. It's a metaphysical value that links us to the nature of things, and also links us to God. That God made of the world beautiful. We seek after beauty because it will give us an idea of what God is. We would not have an idea. So once you destroy beauty in society, you create an atheistic society, because you break the link that exists with God. So these things definitely have their role, and that's why the church always did so much to promote beauty and symbol and in its ceremonial and its liturgy. Everything is extremely rich and meaningful and purposeful, and because it is according to nature, human nature, and human nature is thirsts after these things. It desires these things, and it's a very attractive thing. It's not a forced thing upon a population. And in a real Catholic society, and these kind of things bubble up, let's say, from the people, and are refined, as you go further up society. And then you have a society that's just really full of beauty, full of purpose, full of meaning, and take us toward our final end. So it's part of a whole to consider it. You just can't consider beauty over here and then something else over here. It's part of that whole that the church is really has long been the master of. Knows how to do it well.
And how do you see in this even the church? Have they succumbed to this idea? Have they? What is the view on this matter?
Yeah, definitely. We have a crisis inside society, but we also have a crisis inside the church. And a lot of these ideas are in the church and are, very common in universities and faculties and seminaries. It is definitely a problem, we have to deal with. And, one of the reasons why churches are so empty is because we have emptied them out of that beauty. And where that beauty is sustained in the church, that you will find a lot of people, and you'll find young people. It is very much very interesting. The New York Times' arts editor was in Paris, for France, was in Paris, and she said that she couldn't find anything to report upon because all the theaters were closed. But she said the only show in town is the Catholic Mass, and it is genial. She said, the way the church arranges things, the choreography of the mass, the way the church does. She was just so impressed because that was the only thing she could go to, and she said, I was just overwhelmed by it. And it's rightly so, because the church knows how to make art and make it in the most perfect way.
Wonderful. And just to change slightly the topic and considering more the economics part, you just mentioned before the term you use, the frenetic intemperance.
Yes.
And it's interesting how in the just to describe the economy in Return to Order, you use an interesting metaphor of a cruise ship on a never-ending cruise where bands are playing, theaters are full, or restaurants are
Yes.
crowded, the boutiques all well stocked, everybody is sort of thinks the party is never ending. And how in like, what do you mean by that? How is this related to our the economic state of affairs we live now?
Well, I mean, our economies are. I mean, I'm not one to say our economy is just completely wrong and completely, just nothing is good about it, because it does produce prosperity. It does produce abundance and development of goods and services, and that's largely because it does follow certain rules of natural law, certain rules of economics that allow this to happen and have developed and actually become better. But there is a sector of the economy that is very frenetic. It has these passions, these desires, these gratifications that take things to extremes. And so this part of the economy is what's really like the cruise ship, and it tends to dominate. There is this sort of rock, this sort of foundation, which is very solid, but there is also this other aspect part of the economy that just says, let's borrow until we can't borrow anymore. Let's just produce. Let's outsource. Let's do this. Let's do that, and leads to decisions that are very, very harmful. Even though in the short term they might be they might lead to a certain amount of success. So yeah, we have an economy that is dominated by this frenetic intemperance, but at the same time, there are sectors that are healthy and have contributed to its prosperity.
And what do you, because in the Austrian, in the like we I consider myself a follower of the Austrian school, and we really sort of agree with that. We don't use the term frenetic intemperance, but I
Right.
see exactly what we are saying. We put a lot of emphasis on the fact that aside from the moral issues, from this thing coming from deep in our souls and from our atheism and so forth, and also from our materialistic high time preference mentality, it is also very much incentivized by the growth of the state, which gives
Mm-hmm.
welfare benefits for free and so forth, and
Right.
especially by the central bank and by this continuous pumping of new money, which not only gives us higher prices and therefore a higher time preference on this, but also encourages us to get into indebtedness and
Yes.
indebtedness at the point
Mm-hmm.
of zombifying the economy, so to speak, where everybody
Yes.
seems to be drugged by this new money, right? The financial markets are completely drugged by this new money, which also ends
Yes.
up creating those booms and busts, right? This periodic
Cycles. Yeah.
cycles, right? Which suddenly we're all doing great, and suddenly we all
It goes
which is
down.
very much related to central bank policy, interest rate manipulation, and so. So, do you agree with this view? Do you think it has an impact as well, or what's your view of debt and this sort of massive inflation, central bank manipulation of money, interest rate, and so forth?
Yeah, I would definitely. It is a description of a reality that is you can see and do see. But I would make the central banks and the business cycles more an effect rather than a cause. I think the cause is that internal passions and frenetic desires that raise up, and the effect is the central bank and the business cycles and the free money, etc. And I think I've always said, I don't like the Fed. I don't like the Fed the way it does it. But what it does is it is a system that facilitates phonetic intemperance because it expands and contracts money supply in a way which is pretty. It does it. It does it. It does it. And then that if you were to, for example, just say, well, let's close down the Fed. I think within 10 years you'd have another Fed. It's sort of like the Chinese. The Chinese, they cut down on their banking. They get a shadow banking system that's bigger than the one they close down. There will always be the shadow banking system that will create itself to fulfill those desires. If you go after that desire, if you go after that frenetic intemperance, then the institutions probably will become more will rise, that will adapt to those desires, those temperate desires that should be a part of our economy and the way we live.
Interesting. Well, yeah, I agree. I think I see the point that
Hmm.
even though we get rid of central banks or about the state,
Right.
we don't change our attitudes or vision of the world or inner inner soul, let's say, and the order and so forth. Of course, we will,
Create another one. It will just come up again. And,
exactly.
and
It
yeah,
would
it's
be interesting though to blow to as an experiment. No, I'm joking, but not blow up the Fed, but it's interesting to realize that ultimately ideas are what drive the world, right? Even
oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. And those ideas are very important. And they need to develop into systems. You need to just go beyond just sort of the superficiality of ideas and develop into systems and develop into the metaphysics of things. The philosophy is very important, as you mentioned. Postmodern philosophy is just so crazy and out of this world, but that's what's reflected in our society because of those philosophies. So philosophies are very important, and those philosophies will naturally lead to theologies, or will support the theologies that are part of their structures.
and in your book
And
that you sort of say that what's sort of you analyze the problem of as we've just mentioned,
mhm,
frenetic intemperance, and then you propose a solution and you describe how an organic Catholic economy and society would work in
mhm,
order to um, find, I always use an economics term, an equilibrium, let's say, or a
mhm,
long-term sustainable equilibrium between order and innovation and growth. So having sort of
mhm.
both of the two worlds. How would an organic Catholic economy and society work, and why would it promote this on the one hand order and the other hand growth? Well, what do you think are the virtues of, and why should we go back to that framework?
Well, I think it, the order that would come about as a result of that would be a society of where first of all, virtue would be promoted, not imposed, but promoted. It's a society, above all, I think it is a society that is very much based upon relationships. We've taken the relationship out of our society, and it's very individualistic. That these relationships, they put people together. They each one sustains the other. Each one's supported by the other. That each person sort of has an immense infrastructure of relationships between faith, family, and community that keeps that person in balance. What the modern society is the individual is the supreme good, and they've destroyed those relationships one by one, so that you no longer have that link with the community. You no longer have that link with the past or the future, and so a lot of the natural restraints that we feel comfortable with were taken away, and we're left in a society that is very anonymous, we atomized. It's been described before by a lot of sociologists, and it's very true. And in that type of society, you have to go. You go with the fashions. You go with that which is moving the fastest, because you want somehow to fit in. You want to somehow come together, but it doesn't fulfill. It doesn't satisfy the person. A Catholic society would be something that would satisfy the needs of the person and satisfy the development of the person, and also have very much in mind our religious and God as our final end. And this was a society that did to some extent exist in the Middle Ages and in Christendom. It will never be perfect. I'm not a utopianist. I don't think that there is a perfect society. There will always be problems, and there will always be even major problems. But we have ways to deal with them that are natural according to our nature, that naturally restrain us, that we feel very comfortable with, and will allow us to develop as we should develop. So that is the type of society. In the book, it describes a lot of the virtues, of the way it's organized, the family, the church, the role of the church, the role of relationships, the role of leadership, of natural leaders, of those essential links that help people achieve their goals.
I think especially nowadays with this sort of pandemic and
right, yeah, we feel we feel our emptiness because we cannot even make those superficial links that used to be at least provide some kind of solace. But what is needed today is very much that leadership and the care, that care for the people and care for how society is, and not just everything's become economics, everything's become a lot of money, and that is a very cold and very brutal way of dealing with things, to put it in terms of statistics and not in terms of the human soul, which craves, affection and respect and honor.
And do you think it's doable to go back? I mean, it's from a practical point of view, is it? I mean, of course, it's not easy, I guess, but do you think we can still go back, or we're just, because some people simply it's just impossible. We've lost our way. And what do you, especially after this virus? I mean, especially, I have many Catholic friends who completely now. I mean, not completely, because of course God gives us always a chance. Let's say of getting back on the good track. But considering how the church reacted, they closed down the church for probably
right. Yeah. Oh no, that was just
in human history. And even within the church, you always see people, very scared, and it's almost as if even the religious figures have completely reduced life to a biological.
Yes. Oh no, you're very true. It's very tragic. I mean, it just, and that adds to the tragedy and to the difficulty of turning it around. Yeah, I mean, of course, it can be turned around. I think it can be turned around, but I think the problem really is very much will be defined by how our present system reacts. I think our present system is breaking down, and it will break down. I think there's just it is not sustainable, and I think that then that is why we need to return to order. We need to know where we need to go. As it is now, if things break down, you say, well, I don't know where to go. Well, this church has a solution. The church has ways of dealing with things. And that's part of why I wrote the book, to say, well, when we're looking, we'll know where to look. Right now, if you're not looking, you're on the cruise ship and everything seems to be going fine. I'm not going to be that convincing, because I really I can't compete with what's going on. But today, when they're scrapping cruise ships, people say, well, maybe there is something that the church has to say. And with the grace of God and with the way things are, I think things could develop, and I know I'm sure that they will develop. The image I use at the end of the book is the prodigal son. The prodigal son spent all his father's his riches, and then ended up in the pigsty to take care of the pigs. And then he thought about his father's house, and what got him to think about his father was not a moral problem or even a sentimental problem. It was an economic problem. He ran out of money and he couldn't sustain himself. So he said, well, I better go back to my father's house. And I think the modern world's pretty much in that same position. There are moral problems. There are really even sentimental problems or nostalgic problems, but the economic problem might well settle it. Say, well, maybe we need to go back and look where we need to go. And that's why, whenever people look back in economics, they go to Salamanca School, they go to the church. They'll find it there. They'll find those solutions there. And that is my hopes, that they will look in the right place, because the situation, I don't think, looks that good.
So you're optimistic about what's considering all this these interventions worldwide, this idea of talking about a great reset. They're talking about
structuring lives. Optimistic, no, but somewhat. Let's say I think we need to be realistic about the sustainability of the system we have in place. We need to be realistic about the role of God and grace and how God works in history. If you study how God works in history, many times he acts when everything's lost. And you consider, things like Our Lady of Fatima, what she spoke about the world situation and the prophecies she made, which are pretty much coming true. So, there in the final point is the triumph of the church and the triumph of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. How we get there, that's a whole other thing. I don't really have the roadmap.
Well, that's definitely interesting. I really didn't until I read your book and also thought about it. Effectively, I always thought that a war or these terrible issues get us away from these important questions, but actually it's true. And I think even in C.S. Lewis letters to I don't know how you Screwtape letters, I think.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The devil is so happy that there's war, and the instructor, right, says, well, not so fast, because actually it's the time where
people
starts thinking and looking.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So
no, it definitely is that, and you see this in a lot of things, like even in liturgy. The most enthusiastic people who are following the let's say the Latin liturgy are not the baby boomers of my generation, but the younger people. It's full of young people, because they are attracted to that. It's not, and you look at other fields where they're attracted to ways of cooking, ways of the very refinements that especially Europe has provided us. A lot of them are very enthusiastic for these things, and they are products of Christian civilization. And as you go back, you will find the church, and a lot of people do find the church. There are a lot of conversions happening at least here in the United States, and I'm just very just really edified by them, because these are people who have absolutely no religious background, and they find their way back to the church, and just amazing stories. So, grace does work in souls. Grace can change people, and change people very dramatically in a very short period of time.
Very, very important. I had a question related to your economic framework. Just, I think it might be an interesting curiosity. There's this whole Catholic philosophy of economics, not philosophy of economics, economic framework, which is they call distributism, which comes from John
Yes, yes,
Chesterton from the beginning of the 20th century, where they sort of defend private property, but at the same time they want it local. They want people very close to their fields. The traditional church
mm,
lifestyle, church, very local
right.
and very small property owners.
Hmm.
Do you take inspiration from them? Do you think do you think they are sort of incoherent, or what's your position on that? Like in like compared to your framework, do you think there's a connection there or not really?
Yeah, the distributists there. I tried to put my hands around it when I started studying it, and it's not an easy issue to do because no one really defines distributism. You just get a very wide range of distributists, from people who say, well, we just zone our way into distributism with zoning laws, or others to say, no, we do something more socialistic and we ban this, we ban that. There are really no guidelines or any specific program. It's just a very vague thing. And so you really can't defend it or criticize it if you don't really have a very strong definition of it. I'm definitely against gigantism. There's a chapter in the book against gigantism. That's these huge, super great, disproportional enterprises that simply get to where they are in various ways that probably are not all economic or a lot of politics involved. But at the same time, and I sympathize with the idea of wanting to of small farms. I grew up on a farm, so I know what a farm's like. I like farms. But at the same time, growing up on a farm, you know that some farmers can farm more and others can farm less. And some can farm considerably more and do it efficiently and well and in a very organic way. And I see no real obstacles for that to happen. To say, 3 acres and a cow is, what you should have is, it seems to be frustrating, at least for me as a person who grew up on a farm. If you were to put me into that kind of framework, I would say, no, I want 100 acres. I want 50 acres. I want, much, much more. My tendency would be that way. So I agree, small is beautiful, but big can also be beautiful. And, there are, in our lives, we are confronted with a lot of very big things. And God put big things in our paths. He put the huge redwood trees or huge mountains or a lot of very huge things that are there to inspire us. And they usually are not disproportional, but he didn't make them all big. He made them big, small, and medium. So I think that in an organic Christian society, you have a large spread, a network of different sizes. The average farm in the Middle Ages of a peasant in France was 40 acres. I'm not sure what that is in metrics, but it's not a bad piece of land. And and I think in Germany it was 90 acres. So there were the peasants of those places had quite considerable land holdings, and they weren't, and they had the possibility of going up. And so I think we need to keep that possibility up. And you, as an Austrian, I think you would probably agree that you need that incentive to say, well, we can get bigger, and we can make use of our talents and gifts.
Yeah, my fear of the distributors, although they have a point, I think, which is that mentally, psychologically, metaphysically, person who is in direct contact with the field and so has a greater idea of private property, also of his rights, of his identity, right, and of his relationship and link with God. And I think that seems the case to me, that the biggest places of moral, economic, political, social corruption are in the big cities.
Mm-hmm.
You see in Italy, for example, it's Rome, Milan.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh no, the industrialized cities are. The return to order has a large section against talking about the Industrial Revolution and its role in the destruction of society, and it's, you know, a lot of the bad developments that came out of that. So yeah, you definitely have elements that were criticized. I mean, distributism was largely a criticism of Industrial Revolution and the societies that that came out of it. But yeah, there are points of agreement, and in fact, return to order is very popular among the Chesterton Club here, or places, people who actually, you know, who are distributists. But when I explain my position, a lot of times they'll you know, they are understanding. They simply, you know, they do see the same. We do see the same problems. We may not have the same you know, solutions, but we do see the same problems, and we do see the need for a person to bring production and consumption together again. That you know, that link of the producer directly with the consumer, the craftsman, all the things that are so essential for a real economy to flourish.
Yeah, the problem I see with the distributors is that is the recipe, right? That it seems
Right. Yeah.
to me that in order to have that distributed society nowadays, you need to give a lot of power to the state and make it very.
Very much. Yeah. They're
I,
not going to give it up. Yeah. People are not going to give up their lands or their larger lands. If, you know, it's it doesn't quite make sense in that sense, because you would need a great state power and a taxing power as well, because most of the enforcement, well, it would be taxation, punitive taxation, which seems to stop. It doesn't. Nobody
right,
wants that.
appropriations, right? Like maybe
Well, some of
some
them are taxation based. You know, just make it unsustainable for you to have a lot of land, because you'd be taxed out of it. But as I said, the distributists are all over the place. You never have a real, you know, you don't know exactly what their means or what size they're talking about, what the means of enforcement are. There are many distributisms, and it's not one, you know, solid body of doctrine.
And do you take like do you not apart from the distributors, do you take inspiration from Chesterton, Lewis, these Catholic Apollo, you know,
Apologist, yes. Well, not really, because well, Chesterton was not an economist. He was basically he was a novelist. He wrote a lot of you know, commentaries, but he didn't have, you know, there's no real economic substance there. You know, there was a lot of common sense things that he'll talk about, but there wasn't. I mean, Salamanca has so much more. You know, that's the way I see it. You know, it's his commentaries are nice. They're sometimes funny, but they don't really get to the depths of it, and that's where we need to go. So that's where I draw a lot of my inspiration from those things.
Interesting. And just to finish, why, if a young man that, you know, wants to read your book and or learn about, you know, the problems of modern society, like why should they, why is it a must, in your opinion, to read this book? I personally think that the greatness is to link, right, the economic world, which we think is completely apart from our social
Mm-hmm.
world, or, you know, our understanding about the world, like metaphysical understanding of the world.
Mm-hmm.
See that
Yes.
there's an interconnection that ultimately goes from the metaphysical to the material. But I don't know, but you're the author, so I'm gonna ask you.
Well, I mean, I think this will give you a lot of insights that the people never thought about. You know, so many times we know where we don't want to go. We don't want abortion. We don't want socialism. We don't want this. We don't want that. But many times we don't think about what we do want. It's sort of like the position of a doctor, you know, that only studies diseases and that doesn't know what a healthy body is like. You know, he won't be a very good doctor. He'll know all about the disease and think about diseases, but he won't have that final end in mind. And so what this book tries to do is say, well, this is where we do want to go. And this is where, you know, we have been before, where we've been, you know, how we got here, where we need to go. So that, you know, we're looking at goals. We're not looking at just, we're not getting depressed by looking at the present situation, but we're also trying to get hope, saying, well, you know, this has been done before. The church does have answers. let's look at these answers and see how they resonate.
Great. And now you're working on other projects as well, like to enlarge this theory of yours, or not really?
Well, yes, I'm one of the things I did when I wrote the book. I said, well, I'm never going to stop studying the question, because otherwise you lose your edge. You're not able to keep up with what's happening, and you just so I'm constantly studying the issues that are raised in Return to Order. But at the same time, I'm always writing too, writing articles and and giving talks at times. So I keep abreast of it, and we do have a website that has a following, so to speak. That is constantly sending out to larger and larger numbers of people, so that we can sort of form a type of movement, of people who follow this type of thing.
And where's the website so that our listeners can go?
It's it's returntoorder.org, returntoorder.org. And I would mention that we have open negotiations to get the book published in Spanish, so hopefully that will happen soon. It's actually going to be published in Spain, I think only digitally at this point, via Spanish translator. So it should be great. I'm really looking forward to that.
That's amazing. That's great. So thank you very much, Dr. Horvat. It has been a very, very interesting and enlightening conversation on a broad, so many broad, a broad variety of
Yes.
of issues. And I'm sure that our listeners have now a lot of work to do and getting.
Well, that's good. No, anytime. I mean, I'm very
buy the book and
yes.
read it profoundly.
All right. Yeah, and very good. I'm very happy to know that you exist. That the scholastics are still in Spain, and doing what they need to be doing. Because that was an amazing. You should be very proud of what Spain did for economics.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Horvat.
All right.